I'm 63 years old, and if someone had told me 4 years ago that getting remarried would nearly cost me everything I'd spent 3 decades building, I would have laughed in their face. But that's exactly what happened. And the only reason I still have my honey farm, my meadery, and my freedom today is because when I married Gerald Patterson, I made one critical decision. I never told him or his 3 adult children that the property we lived on wasn't just some family inheritance. It was mine. Every single acre, every beehive, every bottle of mead, all of it. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Margaret Blackwood, though everyone around Prince Edward County calls me Maggie. I bought my first 20 acres of land here in 1995 when I was 33 years old and had exactly $1,200 left in my bank account after the down payment. I was a single mother with an 8-year-old daughter named Sarah, working double shifts as a nurse at the hospital in Picton while trying to figure out how to turn an overgrown piece of farmland into something that could support us. People thought I'd lost my mind. A woman alone, no farming experience, buying land during a recession. My own mother told me I was throwing away my savings on a pipe dream. The bank officer who processed my mortgage looked at me like I was signing my own financial death warrant. But I had a vision. More importantly, I had determination that came from having no other choice but to succeed. I started with 6 beehives that first spring. I'd learned beekeeping from an old Ukrainian beekeeper named Stefan who lived down the road. He taught me everything about the bees, about patience, about reading the weather and the flowers. He said I had a gift for it, that the bees trusted me. Those first years, I'd come home from 12-hour nursing shifts, put Sarah to bed, and then work the hives by flashlight until midnight. By 2000, I had 50 hives and was selling honey at the Picton Farmers Market every Saturday. By 2005, I'd quit nursing entirely because the honey business was finally making enough to support us. By 2010, I had 200 hives, had built a proper extraction facility, and had started experimenting with mead. The meadery was a gamble. Nobody in the county was making mead back then, but I'd done my research, taken courses, experimented for 3 years before I produced anything I was willing to sell. When Blackwood Meadery finally opened its doors in 2012, we were the only artisan meadery between Toronto and Ottawa. Do you know what it takes for a single woman to build something like that in rural Ontario? The early mornings checking hives in -20 weather, the summers when drought killed half my wildflower fields. The year a disease swept through and I lost 60% of my colonies. The bank loans I had to beg for. The equipment that broke down at the worst possible times. The distributors who didn't take me seriously because I was a woman in an industry dominated by men. By the time I turned 60, Blackwood Farms and Meadery sat on 140 acres of prime Prince Edward County land. I had over 500 hives producing some of the finest honey in Ontario. My meads were winning awards at international competitions. The tasting room I'd built attracted tourists from Toronto and beyond. The property, the business, the brand I'd created from nothing was worth at least $6 million, probably more. I wasn't wealthy in the way city people think of wealthy, but I was comfortable. I was secure. I was proud of every single thing I'd built with my own 2 hands. And I was desperately lonely. Sarah had graduated from the University of Guelph with a degree in agricultural science and had taken a job with an organic certification agency in Vancouver. She visited when she could, but her life was on the other side of the country now. My own parents had passed years ago. The friends I'd made over the decades were busy with their own lives, their own grandchildren. I found myself sitting on my farmhouse porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the fields gold, with no one to share it with. 30 years of building, and the one thing I couldn't produce was companionship. That's when I met Gerald at the Wellington Food and Wine Festival in the summer of 2021. He was 66 years old, recently widowed, retired from a career in corporate finance in Toronto. Silver hair, expensive casual clothes, the kind of easy confidence that comes from a lifetime of boardrooms and golf courses. He stopped at my booth to taste my wildflower mead, and something in his smile made me feel like I was 30 years younger. He bought 6 bottles that day. He came back the next day and bought 6 more. By the 3rd day of the festival, he asked if he could take me to dinner. I said yes, before I could talk myself out of it. Gerald was everything I'd never had. Attentive, romantic, interested in every detail of my life and my business. He sent flowers after our first date. He drove 2 hours from Toronto every weekend just to see me. He listened when I talked about the challenges of beekeeping, about the changing climate affecting my wildflower yields, about the regulations that made running a small meadery complicated. He seemed genuinely fascinated by what I'd accomplished. "A woman who built an empire from nothing," he said once, raising his glass of my reserve mead. "That's the most attractive thing I've ever encountered." We got engaged after 7 months. He proposed at sunset in my south apiary, surrounded by my oldest hives, with a ring that must have cost $15,000. I cried when I said yes. I thought I'd finally found the partner I'd been missing all those years. The questions started the very next week. Not from Gerald at first, but from his children. He had 3 of them. Victoria was 43, worked in commercial real estate in Toronto. Andrew was 40, something in financial consulting. Simon was 36 and did contract work in IT. They all lived in the Greater Toronto area and, according to Gerald, were very close with him, especially after their mother's death. The first time they came to visit the farm, 2 weeks after the engagement, I knew something felt wrong. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Victoria walked through my farmhouse like she was appraising it for sale. She ran her hand along the original wood beams, peered at the foundation in the basement, stood on the porch, and surveyed the property with calculating eyes. "This is quite a spread," she said. "How many acres total?" I kept my answer vague. It's been in the family for a while. We've added to it over the years. Andrew wanted to know about the business. He cornered me in the tasting room, asking about annual revenue, profit margins, distribution agreements. "What's your debt load like?" he asked casually, as if it were normal conversation. "A business this size, you must have significant operating loans." I smiled politely. "We do fine. Carlos, my farm manager, handles most of the financial details." That wasn't true. I handled every financial detail myself, but something told me not to reveal that. Simon was more subtle. He asked about my plans for the future, whether I'd thought about retirement, what would happen to the farm after I was gone. "It would be a shame if all this didn't stay in the family," he said. "Have you thought about putting together an estate plan, making sure everything's organized for when the time comes?" I was 60 years old and healthy as a horse. The time coming was hopefully decades away. But I smiled and said, "My lawyer handles all of that. It's complicated with the family trusts and everything." There were no family trusts. The property was mine and mine alone, held in my personal name and a corporation I wholly owned. But I found myself creating this fiction, this impression that the farm was some kind of complicated family inheritance rather than something I'd built from scratch. Looking back, I don't know what made me lie. Instinct, maybe. 30 years of protecting what was mine had taught me to be cautious. When I mentioned to Gerald later that his children had asked a lot of questions, he just laughed and squeezed my hand. "They're protective of me," he said. "After what happened with their mother, they want to make sure I'm taken care of. You understand." I wanted to understand. I wanted so badly to believe that the man I loved was who he appeared to be. Sarah flew in from Vancouver for the wedding, which we held at the farm in September of 2021. The night before, she and I sat on the porch with a bottle of my 10-year reserve mead, watching the stars. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked. I laughed. "Cold feet aren't contagious, you know." "I'm serious." Sarah's voice was tight. "His kids give me a weird feeling. The way Victoria was looking at the extraction facility, the tasting room, the new barn. Mom, she was calculating values. I've seen that look before." "They're just protective of their father," I said. "He's been through a lot, losing their mother and all." "Did you get a prenup?" Sarah: "Mom, please tell me you got a prenup." I had. My lawyer, David Chen, who'd handled my business affairs for 15 years, had insisted on it. Gerald had seemed hurt when I'd brought it up, had asked if I didn't trust him, but he'd signed it in the end. The prenup was clear. All assets acquired before the marriage remained separate property. The farm, the meadery, the business, the brand, everything I'd built stayed mine. Yes, I got a prenup, I told Sarah. She looked relieved, but still uneasy. Just be careful, Mom, something about this doesn't feel right. I dismissed her concerns. I'd spent so long alone, and here was this charming man who seemed to adore me. I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin my chance at happiness. The wedding was beautiful. We exchanged vows under a canopy I'd made from dried wildflowers from my own fields. Gerald's children stood as his attendants, all smiling, all gracious. Victoria even hugged me and called me Mom, which should have been touching but somehow felt rehearsed. Gerald moved into the farmhouse. He brought his golf clubs, his leather chairs, his collection of vintage whiskey. We settled into married life. He played golf at the club in Picton, hosted his children for dinners when they visited, sat on the porch in the evenings with a glass of my mead, and watched the sun set over the hives. For that first year, it was good. Gerald didn't interfere with the business. He let me work my long days during extraction season without complaint. He seemed content to simply be there, to be my companion after so many years alone. But in the second year, things began to shift. It started with Victoria. She showed up one Saturday morning with a real estate agent, claiming she wanted to help me get the property properly appraised for insurance purposes. "You're probably underinsured," she said. "With climate change making wildfires worse, you need to know exactly what this place is worth. I'm seeing comparable agricultural properties in the county going for 12, even 15 million. I already had excellent insurance. I told her so. But have you had the land appraised recently?" The agent, a slick man in a suit that didn't belong on a farm, was already taking notes. "We could have a full assessment done. It's really in your best interest." I asked them to leave. Victoria looked annoyed, but she went. Andrew started appearing at the farm during business hours, wanting to look at the books for the meadery. "Just from a financial planning perspective," he said. "Dad mentioned you might be thinking about expanding distribution. I have connections in that world." I'd never mentioned anything about expanding distribution. Our current setup worked fine. "Andrew, I appreciate the offer, but Carlos and I have the business handled. We're happy with where we are." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Maggie, you're family now. We just want to help. That's what families do." Simon was more insidious. He started dropping by for dinner and casually mentioning tech solutions for the business. An upgraded e-commerce platform, automated inventory systems, social media marketing strategies. "I could build all this for you," he said. "Family rate, of course. It would really modernize your operations." My operations didn't need modernizing. My website worked fine, my customers were happy. But Simon kept pushing, kept finding reasons to bring his laptop and poke around in my systems. The most disturbing change was Gerald himself. He started asking me to sign things. "Just updating my life insurance beneficiaries," he'd say, sliding a form across the kitchen table. "Standard stuff since we're married now." I read every document carefully. Half the time, what he presented had nothing to do with life insurance. They were financial powers of attorney, property transfer authorizations, papers that would give him legal access to my accounts and control over my assets. "Gerald, I'm not signing this," I said more than once. His face would cloud over. "Why not? Don't you trust me? We're married, Margaret. What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. That's how marriage works." "I'm not signing documents I don't fully understand. I'll have David look at them." He'd go cold then. Wouldn't speak to me for days. Would sleep in the guest room and barely acknowledge my presence. Then he'd apologize, say he was just stressed, say he loved me and only wanted to take care of me. And then another document would appear on the kitchen table. I started noticing the phone calls. Gerald would take calls outside, walking down between the rows of hives where he thought I couldn't see him. Long conversations with lots of nodding and low murmuring. When I asked who he was talking to, he'd say, "Just Victoria," or "just business stuff," or "nothing important." 3 years into the marriage, I came home from a meeting with my distributor in Kingston to find Gerald, Victoria, and Andrew in my office in the extraction facility. They had my filing cabinet open, my financial records were spread across my desk. Victoria was photographing documents with her phone. "What are you doing?" I demanded. They all jumped. Victoria fumbled with her phone. Andrew slammed the filing cabinet shut. Gerald smiled, that smooth smile I'd once found so charming. "We were just looking for your insurance papers, darling. Victoria was right that we should update your coverage. These old records are a mess. Those are private business documents. You had no right to be in here." "Margaret, I'm your husband." Gerald's voice hardened. "We don't have secrets in a marriage. Everything that's yours is mine now. That's the law." It wasn't the law. The prenup made that very clear, but the look in his eyes scared me. That night, after Gerald had gone to sleep, I called David Chen. "I think something's very wrong," I said. "I need you to run a check on all the property filings for Blackwood Farms. Make sure everything's still in my name. Make sure no documents have been altered." "Maggie, what's going on?" "I don't know yet, but I have a terrible feeling." David called me back 3 days later. His voice was grim. "Maggie, someone's been filing documents with the county. Transfer deeds, partnership agreements, papers that would give Gerald and his children ownership stakes in Blackwood Farms and Meadery." My blood ran cold. "What? How is that possible? I never signed anything like that. The signatures look like yours. But Maggie, these are forgeries. Pretty obvious forgeries when you compare them to your actual signature. Whoever did this wasn't a professional. Can they do that? Just file fake documents? They can file them. Whether they'd hold up in court is another matter. But Maggie, this is serious. This is fraud. This is criminal." I felt sick. I sat down on my porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear, looking out at the hives I'd built over 30 years. The golden light of sunset was painting everything beautiful, but all I could see was darkness. What do I do? We need to file a police report. We need to get an injunction to prevent any more filings. And Maggie, you need to confront Gerald. But I didn't confront Gerald. Not yet, because I knew that confrontation would end everything, and I needed information first. I called an old contact of mine, a private investigator named Robert Fournier, who I'd worked with years ago when I'd had some trouble with a distributor trying to counterfeit my honey labels. Robert was thorough and discreet. "Robert, I need you to look into someone for me. Gerald Patterson. Everything. His financial history, his criminal record, his past. And I especially need you to find out about his previous wife. How she died. What happened to her estate." Robert took 2 weeks. When he came back, he had a file nearly 3 inches thick. Gerald's previous wife, Elizabeth, had died 6 years ago. But before she died, she had transferred her entire estate, a $4 million home in Rosedale, her investment accounts, her family cottage in Muskoka, everything into Gerald's name. The transfers had happened 8 months before her death. Elizabeth had been suffering from early-onset dementia. Elizabeth's daughter from her first marriage, a woman named Catherine, had tried to contest the transfers. She'd claimed Gerald had manipulated her mother, had taken advantage of her diminished mental capacity to steal her inheritance. But Gerald had produced documents, power of attorney, transfer papers, all supposedly signed by Elizabeth. The case had been settled out of court. Catherine had gotten a small payout. Gerald had kept everything. There was more. Before Elizabeth, there had been another wife, Ruth. She died 4 years before Elizabeth from complications after a fall at home. And before Ruth died, she too had transferred her property, her savings, her investments, all into Gerald's name. Ruth's sister had also tried to contest, had also failed. Robert looked at me across the table at the coffee shop where we met. "Maggie, this man is a predator. He marries vulnerable women, usually widows or divorcees with assets, gains their trust, then systematically transfers everything into his name. His children help him do it. They're a family operation." I felt like I couldn't breathe. 2 dead wives, 2 estates stolen, and now me. What do I do? You divorce him. You press charges for the forgery. You protect yourself and everything you've built. I looked at Robert, at the file full of evidence, at the pattern of destruction this man and his children had left behind them. "No," I said. "I'm not just going to protect myself. I'm going to make sure they can never do this to anyone else again. I went back to David Chen and told him everything. He brought in a forensic accountant who spent 3 weeks going through every financial record, every filing, every document that had been submitted with the county or the provincial registry. We found more forged signatures. We found email chains between Victoria and Andrew discussing how to maximize value extraction from the estate. We found text messages from Gerald to his children strategizing about how to handle me, how to make me more compliant, how to isolate me from Sarah and my friends. We also found something else. Gerald had done this not just to Elizabeth and Ruth, but to a third woman before them. A woman named Helen, who had died in a car accident 12 years ago. She too had transferred property to Gerald shortly before her death. Her family had been too devastated to contest it. 3 dead wives, 3 estates stolen, and now a 4th wife, me, who they were trying to rob while I was still alive. David filed all the evidence with the Crown Prosecutor's Office. We had enough for criminal fraud charges against Victoria and Andrew. For Gerald, we were building a case for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. But before any of that went public, I wanted my confrontation. I planned it with military precision. I told Gerald I wanted to host a special event at the farm, a harvest festival celebration with his children, my daughter Sarah, and a few close friends to mark our 3rd anniversary and the farm's 30th year. He was thrilled. He thought I'd finally come around to being the trusting wife he wanted. The celebration was set for a Saturday afternoon in late September, right before the last honey extraction of the season. I had my farm manager set up tables on the lawn overlooking the south meadow. I hired a caterer from Picton. I made sure my best meads were ready to be poured. Gerald, Victoria, Andrew, and Simon arrived in their best clothes, all smiles. Sarah flew in from Vancouver, giving me a long hug and a questioning look. I'd briefed her the night before. She was barely holding herself together. And then my other guests began to arrive. David Chen, my lawyer. Robert Fournier, my investigator. Detective Constable Marie-Claire Bouchard from the Ontario Provincial Police, and 3 people Gerald wasn't expecting. Catherine, Elizabeth's daughter from her first marriage, Margaret, Ruth's younger sister, and William, Helen's son. Gerald's face went white when he saw them walk onto my lawn. "What is this?" he demanded. "This is a harvest celebration," I said calmly, "and these people are part of the harvest. Catherine is your late wife Elizabeth's daughter. Margaret is your late wife Ruth's sister. William is your late wife Helen's son. I thought it was time we all got to know each other." Victoria stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. We're leaving." "Sit down, Miss Patterson." Detective Bouchard's voice was firm. "Nobody's leaving yet." Andrew looked like he was going to be sick. Simon was already edging toward the parking lot, but one of the officers who'd arrived with Detective Bouchard blocked his path. I stood at the head of the table, a glass of my 30-year anniversary mead in my hand, looking at each of them in turn. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I asked. "Did you honestly believe you could forge documents, file fake transfer papers, try to steal everything I've spent 3 decades building, and I wouldn't notice?" Gerald tried to recover his composure. "Margaret, darling, I don't know what these people have told you, but this is all a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I let my voice carry across the lawn. "Like it was a misunderstanding when Elizabeth transferred her $4 million estate to you 8 months before she died of dementia? Like it was a misunderstanding when Ruth signed over her cottage and her savings right before her fatal fall? Like it was a misunderstanding when Helen's property ended up in your name just weeks before her accident? Those were legitimate transfers." Gerald's voice was rising. "They wanted me to have those assets. They loved me. They had dementia and traumatic brain injuries." I stepped closer to him. "They couldn't legally consent. You manipulated them. You and your children systematically robbed 3 women, and you thought you'd do the same to me." Catherine spoke up, her voice shaking with years of suppressed grief and anger. "He forged my mother's signature. I've been saying it for years. Nobody believed me." Margaret, Ruth's sister, added, "My sister called me 2 weeks before she died. She was scared. She said Gerald kept bringing her papers to sign, and when she refused, he'd get angry. She was afraid of him." William just stared at Gerald with hollow eyes. I was 17 when my mother died. I spent 10 years thinking it was just an accident. Now I know better. I looked at Gerald, at Victoria, at Andrew, at Simon. You thought I was just another elderly woman you could rob. A lonely widow too grateful for companionship to ask questions. But here's what you didn't know about me. I set down my glass and let them see the woman they'd underestimated. I built this farm from 20 acres of scrubland and 6 beehives. I did it while working double shifts as a nurse and raising a daughter alone. I survived droughts and diseases and recessions and an industry that told me women couldn't succeed. I fought banks and bureaucrats and competitors who tried to drive me out of business. I have spent 30 years protecting what's mine. I gestured at the fields around us, at the hives gleaming in the afternoon sun, at the meadery building I designed myself. Did you really think I wouldn't fight you? David stepped forward with a folder of documents. These are the forged filings you submitted to the county and provincial registries. We've had them analyzed by forensic experts. The signatures are demonstrably fake. We have copies of your email and text communications discussing the fraud. We have statements from your father's previous victims, and we have evidence suggesting that the deaths of at least 2 of your father's previous wives warrant reinvestigation. Detective Bouchard stepped forward. Gerald Patterson, Victoria Patterson, Andrew Patterson, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Additional charges may be forthcoming. The next hour was controlled chaos. Rights were read, handcuffs were applied. Simon immediately started claiming he didn't know anything, throwing his siblings under the bus to save himself. Victoria cried and demanded to call her lawyer. Andrew threatened lawsuits. Gerald was silent through it all, just staring at me with pure hatred burning in his eyes. As they were being led to the police vehicles, he finally spoke. "You vindictive woman," he spat. "I loved you." I walked right up to him, close enough that only he could hear me. "No, you didn't. You loved what you thought you could steal from me. But here's the thing, Gerald, it was never yours to take. Every hive you see, every jar of honey, every bottle of mead, every acre of this land. I bought it. I built it. I earned it with 30 years of work, and you couldn't take it from me because I knew exactly what I had, and I was smart enough to protect it." I stepped back and watched them load him into the cruiser. The criminal proceedings took nearly a year. Victoria and Andrew pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery in exchange for reduced sentences. They each got 3 years. Gerald went to trial. He was convicted of fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and conspiracy. The investigations into Elizabeth's and Ruth's deaths were reopened, revealing patterns of suspicious behavior that would keep him under scrutiny for years. At 69 years old, his sentence of 14 years was effectively a life term. Simon cooperated with prosecutors and received probation in exchange for testifying against his father and siblings. Last I heard, he'd moved to Alberta and changed his name. The divorce was finalized 4 months after the arrests. The prenup held absolutely. Gerald got nothing. His legal fees bankrupted him completely. Catherine, Elizabeth's daughter, contacted me after the trial. She said watching Gerald finally face justice was the first peace she'd felt since her mother died. We've stayed in touch. Margaret, Ruth's sister, sends me Christmas cards now. William testified at the trial and told me afterward that he finally felt like his mother's death meant something. Today, I'm 63 years old. Blackwood Farms in Meadery is thriving better than ever. Sarah decided to move back from Vancouver last year. Watching her mother fight for what was hers inspired her to want to be part of the legacy she'd once walked away from. She's learning the business now, and I've never been happier to share it. My farm manager, Carlos, just celebrated his 15th year with me. The new extraction facility we built last spring is the most efficient we've ever had. My reserve mead won gold at the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair. I never remarried. I probably never will. But I tell this story whenever I have the opportunity, especially to women my age, especially to women who have built something with their own hands and their own sacrifice. When I got married at 60, I made a choice. I didn't tell my husband or his children that the farm we lived on was solely mine. I let them believe it was complicated family property, old trusts, inherited land, something vague and bureaucratic. I kept my cards close to my chest. Some people might say I should have trusted Gerald, that if I didn't trust him enough to tell him the truth, I shouldn't have married him in the first place. But here's what 30 years of protecting what's mine taught me. Trust is earned, not given. Trust is proven over time, through actions, not assumed because of words and promises. And protecting yourself isn't about distrust, it's about wisdom. It's about recognizing that the person who whispers, "I love you" today might be planning to rob you tomorrow. I kept my secret for 3 years. Those 3 years gave me time to watch, time to notice the patterns, time to see who Gerald and his children really were before it was too late. If I'd told them from the first day that I was the sole owner of a $6 million estate, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe they would have moved faster. Maybe I wouldn't have noticed the manipulation until I'd signed something I couldn't undo. Maybe I'd be like Elizabeth and Ruth and Helen, stripped of everything I'd built, a cautionary tale instead of a survivor. But I didn't tell them. And that secret saved me. If I could give advice to anyone entering a later-in-life marriage, or truly any marriage at all, it would be this. Know what you have. Know exactly what you've built, what you own, what you've sacrificed to create. Don't let anyone make you feel that taking inventory of your own life is cold or unromantic. Know what it's worth. Get proper appraisals. Understand the value of your property, your business, your investments. Knowledge is protection. Protect it legally. Get a prenup, no matter how much it hurts the other person's feelings. Keep your assets in your own name until you are absolutely certain of who you're dealing with. Consult a lawyer before you sign anything, ever. And don't feel guilty about keeping some things private. You don't owe anyone complete transparency about your finances, your assets, or your net worth, not even someone who says they love you. Especially someone who says they love you and then starts asking questions about your will. Love is a beautiful thing. I believe that still. Companionship in our later years is something we all deserve, but naivety is dangerous. And your life's work? The thing you've built with your own hands over years or decades of sacrifice, that is not something you gamble with. Not ever. I still make honey. I still make mead. I still walk my apiaries at sunset, checking on the hives I've tended for 30 years. I still taste every batch, make every blending decision, welcome guests to my tasting room with the same pride I felt when I poured my first commercial bottle. The difference now is that when someone asks me about the property, about the farm, about who owns all of this, I tell them the truth. This is my farm. I bought the first 20 acres with my own savings and spent 30 years building it into what you see today. Every hive, every field, every bottle in this tasting room, I made it. I earned it. I own it. And it's going to stay that way. Because I was never Gerald Patterson's victim. I was never his mark. I was never his elderly target to be charmed and flattered and robbed. I was his reckoning. And I'm still here, on my land, living my life, making my honey and my mead, surrounded by the legacy I built and the daughter who will carry it forward. Alone in some ways, yes, but free in every way that matters. And that freedom, that security, that knowledge that what's mine is still mine, that is worth more than any companionship built on lies. Protect yourselves, my friends. Protect what you've built. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never, ever feel guilty for keeping your own secrets. Because sometimes that secret is the only thing standing between you and losing everything.